Friends, thank you for being here today. What if I told you that a nation sitting on the third largest oil reserves on the planet, possessing more recoverable oil than Iraq, Iran, or Kuwait, still finds itself spending billions of dollars annually to import gasoline and diesel from foreign countries? How is it possible that a G7 nation practically overflowing with energy resources remains trapped in an economic loop where it sells its raw wealth at a discount only to buy it back as finished products at a premium? This baffling contradiction lies at the heart of the Canadian energy sector, painting the picture of a resource colony that exports raw materials cheap and imports finished goods expensive. Before we unravel this mystery, I want to hear your take. Do you think this is a failure of policy or simply bad luck? Drop your thoughts in the comments below as we get started. To really understand why Canada cannot simply build its own refineries to capture this value, we have to look far beyond political will or financial capital, and instead examine a complex web woven from the chemistry of the oil itself, the brutal realities of geography and climate, and the shifting economics of a global labour market in decline. To get to the bottom of this refining problem, we first need to get our hands dirty and understand the unique chemistry of the resource itself. Unlike the light, sweet crude that gushes out of the ground in Texas or Saudi Arabia, nearly 97% of Canada's reserves are trapped in the oil sands of northern Alberta. This substance, known as bitumen, is not liquid at room temperature. It is a semi-solid, tar-like material, often described as having the consistency of cold molasses mixed with sand. It cannot even flow through a pipeline unless it is diluted with lighter hydrocarbons, creating a cocktail known as dilbit. Refining this heavy, sulfur-rich dirty oil requires immense technical complexity, demanding specialized facilities equipped with massive cokers and hydrocrackers to break down the heavy molecules into usable fuels. This brings us to a critical realization about why our neighbors to the south hold all the cards. The United States is already perfectly set up to handle this specific type of resource, because the massive refineries on the U.S. Gulf Coast in Texas and Louisiana were originally engineered to process heavy crude from Venezuela and Mexico. When Canadian production surged, these American facilities were logically positioned to act as the primary buyer. In contrast, Canada's domestic refineries are generally older, smaller, and designed for lighter conventional crude, meaning they simply cannot process the heavy volume coming out of the oil sands. Consequently, Canada has no choice but to ship its raw bitumen south, often selling it at a massive discount known as the Western Canadian Select Differential, only for American companies to refine it and sell the gasoline back to Canada at full global market prices. But even if we found the money to upgrade our facilities, we would immediately run headlong into what experts call the geography trap. The location of the resource is fundamentally disconnected from the location of the consumer. The oil sands are located in remote northern Alberta, landlocked and hundreds of kilometers from major infrastructure, while nearly 90% of the Canadian population lives in a narrow corridor along the U.S. border, thousands of kilometers away. This creates a logistical nightmare because refineries generally need to be located near their customers. Transporting refined products like gasoline and jet fuel is far more dangerous and expensive than pumping crude oil. If you build the refinery near the oil in the north, you spend a fortune shipping volatile fuels across the Canadian Shield and the Rockies, and if you build the refinery near the cities, you face the immense cost of transporting the heavy crude across a continent of geological obstacles. If the distance wasn't enough of a deterrent, we also have to talk about the climate tax that nature levies on Canadian industry. Building and operating complex industrial facilities in Canada is significantly more expensive than in the United States, simply because of the weather. In Alberta, winter temperatures regularly plunge to minus 30 or 40 degrees Celsius, extremes where steel becomes brittle, equipment freezes, and concrete cannot cure properly. This means construction projects that take 3 years in Texas might take 5 years in Canada, blowing up budgets before a single drop of oil is refined. Once operational, the facility requires massive heating bills to keep tanks and pipes from freezing, along with heavy insulation that adds to maintenance costs, making the operation of a refinery in Canada about 20 to 30% more expensive than an equivalent facility on the warm, accessible Gulf Coast. Beyond the physical challenges of land and weather, we run into a hard wall of basic economics regarding market size. A modern refinery costs between $5 billion and $10 billion to construct, and to justify such an expenditure, investors need a guaranteed market to buy the product. Canada, with a population of only 40 million, simply does not consume enough fuel to support the output of new mega-refineries, especially when compared to the US market, which is roughly 8 times larger. If Canada were to build refineries, it would have to export the surplus gasoline. But the global market, specifically the growing economies in Asia, does not want to buy finished gasoline. They want to buy crude oil so they can refine it themselves and capture the economic value. Canada cannot compete with the Gulf Coast juggernauts in exporting refined products, leaving it with no viable business case for domestic expansion. Recognizing that refining at home is geographically and economically unfeasible, Canada has decided to change the map by pivoting its strategy toward transportation infrastructure. The recently completed Trans Mountain Expansion, TMX, represents a massive strategic shift, twinning a pipeline across 1,150 kilometers of mountainous terrain, tunneling under rivers, and navigating strict environmental regulations to triple Canada's capacity to move oil to the Pacific coast. The goal is no longer to refine the oil, but to break the US monopoly on buying it. For the first time, Canadian producers can bypass the American discount and sell directly to Asian markets like China and India, generating billions in revenue and taxes, while accepting the reality that Canada will remain an exporter of raw resources rather than a manufacturer of finished fuels. However, as we look at these massive infrastructure projects, we must face a sobering reality regarding the workers who built them. There is a prevailing myth that expanding the energy sector automatically equates to a permanent boom in employment. But recent trends suggest we are entering a period of managed decline for the workforce. Since 2014, output from the oil sands has tripled to over 4 million barrels per day, yet the industry has shed approximately 33,000 jobs. We saw a stark example of this recently when Imperial Oil, despite healthy production, laid off 900 workers and moved technical operations to the United States. This signals that the industry has entered a harvest phase, prioritizing efficiency over growth. Companies are utilizing automation, autonomous haulers, and artificial intelligence to drive efficiency and lower costs, aiming to return cash to shareholders through dividends and buybacks, rather than reinvesting in labor-heavy infrastructure projects. Furthermore, we must address the elephant in the room, the ticking clock of the global energy transition and the strategic vulnerability of relying on a single partner. Even if we could magically wish away the frozen tundra and the vast distances, building a refinery today is an economic gamble that borders on recklessness. We are living in an era where the smart money is fleeing from long-term fossil fuel infrastructure. A refinery is a 40-year asset, but with the rapid adoption of electric vehicles and the global push for decarbonization, demand for gasoline is projected to peak around 2030 and then begin a permanent decline. Why would any rational investor pour $10 billion into a mega project in Alberta that might become a stranded asset, a massive, rusting paperweight, before it even pays for itself? This is why the major oil companies are not fighting to build refineries. They are fighting to reduce their break-even costs. They are stripping down their operations to stay profitable in a world where oil prices might stay lower for longer. They are not looking to build cathedrals of industry. They are looking to build life rafts of efficiency. This economic caution is compounded by a geopolitical shift that has fundamentally altered Canada's relationship with the United States. For decades, the trade relationship was comfortable. Canada sold, America bought. But the US shale revolution changed everything. The United States is no longer just a customer. They are now the world's largest oil producer and a fierce competitor. This has stripped away the safety net. We saw the tremors of this new reality when US administrations floated the idea of tariffs on Canadian energy imports. That singular threat exposed the terrifying fragility of Canada's position. When 97% of your exports go to one buyer, and that buyer suddenly decides they might not need you, or worse, that they want to tax you, you don't have a trade partnership, you have a dependency crisis. This is the true value of the Trans-Mountain expansion. It isn't just a pipe in the ground, it is an insurance policy against American protectionism. By opening the door to Asian markets, Canada isn't just selling oil, it is buying sovereignty. It is ensuring that when the next trade dispute arises, Canadian leaders can negotiate from a position of strength, knowing they have tankers headed for Shanghai and Mumbai, not just pipelines headed for Illinois. So, while critics might argue that shipping raw bitumen to Asia is a failure to add value domestically, the harsh strategic truth is that adding value through refining is a 20th century ambition in a 21st century market. The real value today lies in optionality and survival. The global energy map is being redrawn, and Canada has realized that trying to force a domestic refining industry into existence against the headwinds of geography, climate, and market forces is a fight it cannot win. Instead, the focus has shifted to what Canada can control, getting the resource out of the ground as efficiently as possible, and getting it to as many buyers as possible before the window of oil demand begins to close. It is a pragmatic, albeit painful acceptance that Canada's role in the global energy system is that of a supplier, not a manufacturer. So, where does this leave us? The reason Canada cannot build its own refineries is not a failure of ambition, but a convergence of unchangeable realities. The unique chemistry of bitumen requires processing that the US is already optimized for. The vast distances and brutal climate of the Canadian landscape destroy profit margins. The small domestic market cannot justify the billions in capital investment required. While the Trans-Mountain pipeline has solved the issue of market access and price leverage, it does not change the fundamental structure of the economy. Canada remains rich in resources, but poor in value-added processing, a modern resource colony governed by the laws of geography and the ruthless efficiency of the global market. If you found this breakdown helpful, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories that reshape